Hello, my name is Jared Boyce. I'm a senior education researcher at SRI International, and I'm very pleased and proud to be a part of the CI STEM project looking at after-school programming, continuous quality improvement, and STEAM programming in particular across the state of California. In this recording, I am going to present a summary of the CI STEM survey. The date of this presentation is January 2023. The survey occurred in January and February of 2022. A one-page summary of the CI STEM project overall, though you can certainly find out more information on the website, is that it's a 5-year study from 2019 through 2024 of continuous quality improvement in STEAM programming in California's publicly funded after-school programs. This is a collaboration between SRI Education and the University of North Texas, and it's funded by the National Science Foundation. Our goal is to understand how CQI is implemented, both in general and how it is used to support STEAM programming. The surveys are only one of our 3 data sources that we are using in this project, the others being interviews and case studies of after-school program sites. The overall goal of the survey is to understand 3 things about after-school sites in California. First, we want to understand continuous quality improvement, people's knowledge about it in program and site practices around CQI. We want to understand STEAM programming in after-school sites, and we want to understand whether and how CQI is used to improve STEAM programming in these after-school sites. Very importantly, this project does not evaluate any individual, any site, or EXLD itself. Our goal is to understand CQI and STEAM such that we can support after-school programs, ultimately in better supporting the youth whom they serve. As I said earlier, the survey was launched in January and February of last year. And the way in which the survey was administered is that we invited all grant managers to attend, to engage. If they agreed, then we sent them a survey link for instructions for submitting site coordinator information. Then the grant managers could take a survey, and then the site coordinators could take a survey themselves and would share links within their frontline staff and other teams who support youth. Our final survey sample included approximately 200 sites with 46 grant managers, 33 program directors, 190 site coordinators, 45 ACES specialists, and 379 frontline staff. Across the survey, we use the following language to describe what we are surveying about and whom we are surveying. So a site is the term that we use for a location running an after-school program funded by EXLD. Then the 5 respondent groups are, number 1, grant manager, someone who manages a grant, sometimes across multiple programs or sites. Program director, someone who directs a program, usually over multiple sites. Site coordinator, someone who oversees a single site or multiple sites, more rarely, including overseeing frontline staff. An after-school education and safety specialist, otherwise known as ACES specialist for short, someone who oversees a single site or multiple sites funded by the ACES program in particular. And last but not least, certainly, frontline staff. These are people who oversee and lead activities and provide instruction directly to youth who attend the after-school programs. Just to provide a bit of a disclaimer, this is approximately 4.5% of the number of after-school sites in the state of California. So while we think that our themes and findings are certainly true of the people who took our survey, they may or may not generalize to the entirety of after-school programming in California itself. So, and beyond that, this presentation reports on some, but not all of the questions asked in the survey. You can find full information on the full content of the survey and the full responses to the survey on the project website, which is probably how you got to this recording, and a link to that will be provided at the end of this presentation. One other note is for the survey results weighting of frontline staff, We weighted the frontline staff results such that each site carries the same statistical weight for its frontline staff, regardless of how many frontline staff responded to that site. So what this means is that, for example, if site A has 3 frontline staff responses and site B has 6 frontline staff responses, then we would statistically weight these such that those 6 overall carried the same weight as these 3, because we wanted to capture site knowledge and understanding. And so every frontline staff response counts, to be abundantly clear on that point. And we wanted to make sure that larger sites with more frontline staff didn't overwhelm the averages relative to smaller sites with fewer staff. And in terms of the experience and veterancy that our respondents have in after-school programming, we note that most grant managers, program directors, and site coordinators reported working in after-school programs for 6 or more years, which is more than either ACES specialists or frontline staff. And just take a moment, because this table structure will appear regularly throughout this recording. GM stands for the grant manager response, PD, program director, SC, site coordinator, ACES, ACES specialist, and FS is frontline staff. You'll also notice the prompt for the question is included in the table, the top line of the table. How many years have you worked in this case, in after-school programming? So that's just the STEM. And then you can see for each of those answer options what the percentages are. And then on the bottom row, you can see the respondent N. So how many people within each of those 5 respondent groups responded to this question. So you can clearly see, looking at the 6+ years row, how 71% of grant managers have been working in after-school programming for 6 or more years. For the program directors, it's 79%, and so on. The first of the 3 themes I'm going to walk you through for some of our survey results is on CQI knowledge and practice. First, we wanted to assess how familiar respondents were with continuous quality improvement. Overwhelmingly, grant managers and program directors, followed by site coordinators, reported the most knowledge of CQI. So if you look at the bottom of the slide, you'll note that this is on a 1 to 4 scale, where 1 is not at all familiar and then 4 is extremely familiar. And you can see how grant managers, program directors have, for first off, just even on the term continuous quality improvement, very high scores, very close to 4. And then grant managers all the way down are 3.5 or higher on a variety of CQI concepts and activities. Then program directors follow, again, 3+ across the board. Site coordinators are a little bit less than program directors, though still around the 3 level. For ACES, you'll note that there is then a drop from the site coordinators, and then for the frontline staff, there's a drop further still, where the averages are not even at the moderately familiar level. You'll also note for frontline staff at the N on the very bottom row, it says approximately 378. This is because some respondents responded to some of these sub-items, but not others. And just to keep the slide clean, we averaged the number of respondents across, in this case, all of these 5 options, and then just said approximately to reflect that there is a little variation in response rates. You'll see that approximate tilde for N's throughout some of the slides. Beyond CQI documents, we also wanted to understand the extent to which respondents were familiar with, beyond CQI concepts, we wanted to understand the extent to which respondents were familiar with CQI documents. And overwhelmingly, again, grant managers and program directors, followed by site coordinators, reported the most knowledge of CQI documents. Here we listed the documents with the highest levels of familiarity. First and foremost, the quality standards for expanded learning in California, then completing a quality improvement plan, guidance for a quality improvement process, the crosswalk between the quality standards for expanded learning and program quality assessment tools, and then last but not least, certainly, the respondents' programs or sites' previous CQI plans. You'll notice that consistently, grant managers have very high levels of familiarity, followed by program directors and site coordinators. You'll notice, though, that when we get down to the frontline staff members, very few, or relatively few, I should say, frontline staff are familiar with any of these documents, including the quality standards for expanded learning in California in general. In terms of who contribute to CQI plans, the majority of grant managers, program directors, and site coordinators contributed to their site's CQI plans. Most ACES specialists and frontline staff did not. So in the top table, you'll see self-reports of whether or not people wrote or contributed to their site or program CQI plan, where most GMs, PDs, and site coordinators did, yet under half of ACES and frontline staff did. However, when we asked grant managers and program directors whether or not they involved site coordinators and frontline staff, you can see how it seems that overwhelmingly, grant managers and program directors think that they are involving site coordinators and frontline staff, though you can see the rate at which they think they involve site coordinators and frontline staff does not match the self-reports of the site coordinators and frontline staff themselves. So there seems to be a bit of a disconnect potentially between whether or not people feel involved at the site coordinator and frontline staff level versus how much of the grant managers and program directors think they are involving them. In terms of CQI work underway, one of the things that we found quite interesting is that nearly half of frontline staff and nearly 1/4 of site coordinators and ACES specialists reported not knowing if their site was currently working through a continuous quality improvement cycle. As you can see from this table, overwhelmingly, the vast majority of grant managers were confident in saying yes or no to have their sites being involved in a CQI cycle at the time of the survey. Program directors were, again, quite confident as well. Site coordinators were still confident, but you can still see on that don't know, not sure row, about 1/4 of them did not know whether or not their site was currently engaged in CQI work, which gets up to close to half when we get to frontline staff. And in terms of perceptions around continuous quality improvement data use, most grant managers, program directors, and site coordinators report that they collected data as part of their CQI process. And only around half of ACES specialists and frontline staff recorded collecting data for the CQI process. So you can see that from the table on the yes row. However, again, to the not knowingness, very few grant managers and program directors weren't sure, didn't know whether or not their sites used data. But 1/5 of site coordinators reported not knowing, and roughly half of ACES specialists and frontline staff, again, did not know or were not sure of whether or not their sites used data for their CQI process. Now, this is a rather large table where we asked people to respond where, if they were working on a continuous quality improvement cycle, what standards were they focused on? And certainly a cycle could focus on multiple standards. So there's no way to get to add things up to 100% here, because you could say, I'm working on 3 standards, for example. However, these are the results of the people who said they were working through a cycle. Because this is so many numbers, here's a little bit of color coding for high, medium, and low. So the standards that have the most engagement in the continuous quality improvement cycle at the time of the survey are the ones in blue: safe and supportive environment, active and engaged learning, youth voice and leadership, and quality staff. The middle group is the group in white, which is skill building, healthy choices and behaviors, diversity, access, and equity. And then the low group is clear vision, mission, and purpose, collaborative partnerships, program management, and sustainability in yellow. Now, you'll notice that there's only 11 of the 12 quality standards listed here. This is because the 12th standard is continuous quality improvement itself. In terms of the specific work going on at after-school programming sites, all respondents groups somewhat agreed to knowing everything they needed to know about their program or site's CQI work, but did not seemed to agree that everyone else knew more about it than they did. So what does that mean? So again, looking at the bottom of the slide for the response score from 1 to 4, where 1 is strongly disagree and 4 is strongly agree, you can see for the prompt, I know everything I need to know about my programs or sites' continuous quality improvement work, we have pretty strong near 3s across the board. So somewhat agrees that they know everything they need to know. But when you look at other people know more than I do, that drops significantly. Only frontline staff is again about 3. So somehow, on average, people only somewhat agree that they know what they need to, but are uncertain or only somewhat agreeing that other people know more, which we think begs an interesting question of where does that knowledge live? If you only somewhat know what you need to, but other people don't know more than you, where would you get that information about your site's CQI work? We asked a variety of questions on CQI training, and one of them is on the occurrence of whether or not people were trained in CQI. So for everyone other than frontline staff, majorities in those groups reported receiving training on CQI since they started their positions. So if you've been there for 6 years in after-school programming, then in those 6 years, did you get trained? Almost half of frontline staff were not sure whether or not they received this training at all. And as you can see from this table, even for the people who were certain, there are still some significant minorities, such as a quarter of grant managers, a quarter of program directors, for example, who were certain that they did not get training. In terms of whether or not people need training, most respondents reported that they needed more training on CQI. Other than grant managers, a majority of respondents in each group said they do need more training in CQI. In terms of the value and relevance of the CQI work that they are doing at their sites, all respondent groups chose between somewhat agree and strongly agree on all items concerning value and relevance of the CQI to their jobs. These are only a selection of the prompts we asked respondents. And as you can see, for whether or not quality improvement is a top priority, the time on continuous quality improvement is well spent, and being satisfied with the amount of time they spend on quality improvement, all of these averages across all the groups are at least somewhat agree, if not significantly higher for several groups and several questions. In terms of how respondents perceive the impact of CQI in their sites, all respondent groups across all items, again, selected somewhat agree to strongly agree concerning the impact of CQI on their work. So not just is it valuable and relevant, but it also has an impact. So for these selection of prompts through the quality improvement process, I've learned things I didn't know before. I've made changes to my practice based on our quality improvement process. As a result of our program's participation in the quality improvement process, the quality of the programming improved at my sites. Very strong results. Except for one of these 15 responses, it's 3.5s across the board, if not higher. And then the one that isn't is just a 3.4. Still strong agreement. That was quite a few slides and quite a lot of talking on CQI. So let's just summarize what we've seen across the last slides. First, across all respondent groups, there's consistent agreement on the value and impact of CQI on their work. Second, most respondents reported needing more training on CQI in general and not clearly knowing everything they need to know about their CQI work. Overall, frontline staff report less familiarity with CQI practices and data use than other respondent groups. And there is some disagreement and uncertainty around who is involved in the CQI process across different levels of the system. And we wonder whether or not grant managers and program directors may want to consider how to more extensively involve other levels of staff in their CQI work. Now we're going to talk about a few questions related to STEAM programming at these after-school sites. First, we wanted to survey about content area. And site coordinators, ACES specialists, and frontline staff most commonly reported that mathematics and visual arts are the STEAM content areas offered at their program or site. So this is a partial list of the different areas we asked about. In this case, as you can see here, a majority of site coordinators, ACES specialists, and frontline staff reported mathematics and visual arts being offered at their sites. And then we also saw significant levels of engineering, life science, physical science, and computer science. You'll notice that the columns for grant manager and program director are empty. That's because certain respondent groups only took certain questions on the survey. And as designed, our survey only asked certain STEAM programming questions of site coordinators, ACES specialists, and frontline staff, as they would be the closest to the work at those sites. In terms of youth engagement, site coordinators, ACES specialists, and frontline staff agreed that approximately 60% of the students at their sites participate in STEAM activities. And you'll see the number somewhat varies from an average of 57% to 64%, but that's a pretty tight range. So overall, it seems as if roughly 60% of youth on average are reported to engage in STEAM activities. In terms of who plans for STEAM activities, overwhelmingly, site coordinators and frontline staff plan STEAM activities. This is a question where you can see we included grant managers and program directors as respondents. And the two rows with the highest percentages are row 2, site coordinator, and 3, frontline staff. And you can see how, interestingly to me, grant managers have a 78% average of reporting that site coordinators plan STEAM activities, yet only 51% of frontline staff report them doing so. And those numbers are somewhat flipped on the next row, where 56% of grant managers report frontline staff planning the activities, yet nearly 70% of frontline staff say that they plan STEAM activities. In terms of the resources, the most commonly reported single source of curriculum materials or resources for STEAM programming was internet searches, followed by site coordinators. So there was a variety of options, significantly more than is listed here on this slide, for where we asked people where they get curriculum materials and or resources for STEAM programming. And again, these things do not add up to 100% because people could say that they got their resources or materials from multiple sources. The most common source, as you can see here on line 1, is internet searches, where close to half of grant managers, program directors, and site coordinators say internet searches are a source of resources and materials for STEAM programming, with about 1/3 of ACES specialists and frontline staff saying so. The second was site coordinators, where roughly 1/3 of grant managers, site coordinators themselves reported site coordinators providing the resources or materials, 40% of program directors, 45% of frontline staff, and close to 50% of ACES specialists. Then beyond that, the numbers get significantly smaller across the different respondents groups. The only other one I want to highlight in this moment is the County Office of Education, line 5, where a majority of grant managers say the County Office of Education provides curricular materials and resources for STEAM programming, though that doesn't seem to be reflected in the other respondent groups. Part of the California Department of Education is providing support for what are called STEAM communities of practice, or hubs. And we asked respondents to say whether or not their sites were members of STEAM communities of practice or hubs. Only grant managers and program directors were confident in knowing if their sites were part of a STEAM community of practice or hub, and 1/4 of them even were not sure. Most sites surveyed were not part of a STEAM community of practice or hub. As you can see in line 1, roughly 1/4 of grant managers and program directors said they were part of a STEAM community of practice or hub, and ACES specialists reported working at sites that were part of STEAM hubs at the highest rate, which is still 36%. And then we have a variety of options for how to say no, such as no, we never have been, no, but we used to be, no, but we're interested in learning more about it. And then on the last line, don't know, not sure, you can see how a quarter of grant managers and program directors were not sure whether or not their sites were in a STEAM hub or a community of practice. Roughly half of ACES specialists didn't know, and sizable majorities of site coordinators and frontline staff were unaware whether or not their site was a member of a STEAM community of practice or hub. For those that did report being in a STEAM community of practice or hub at their site, they agreed that those communities of practice and hubs provided their programs and sites with professional development and high quality STEAM learning activities. You can see for the professional development row, there's a majority of respondent groups across the board that say that the STEAM community of practice or hub provided their program or site with PD. And then similarly strong ratings or strong reports for opportunities to collaborate among the first 3 respondent groups. And then again, across the board for high quality STEAM learning activities. Then the third area of the survey was CQI and STEAM programming and how they intersect. First, we asked whether or not sites conducted continuous quality improvement cycles specifically focused on STEAM programming. And most respondents said no or not sure. For the grant managers and program directors, a majority of the responses were no, we have not done CQI cycles specifically on STEAM. For site coordinators and ACES, it was a bit mixed between no and not sure, yet still a majority are in the no plus not sure group if you combine them. And then almost 2/3 of frontline staff were not sure whether or not they had done CQI cycles specifically on STEAM. In terms of the impact, most respondents reported either not changing their STEAM programming due to CQI work or not knowing whether the programming had changed. We asked this question of all respondents, even if they didn't do CQI specifically on STEAM, because it was possible, for example, that they did a CQI cycle on a related topic, such as youth voice, that's not specifically about STEAM programming, yet one might imagine that improving youth voice in general could improve various types of activities and engagements, and that STEAM programming could improve as a result of that. But even with that broad lens, we still get a majority of all responding groups either saying no or not sure to any improvement in STEAM programming from CQI. In terms of collecting data on the quality of their STEAM programming, a majority of grant managers said that they did collect data on the quality of their STEAM programming, but they were the only respondent group with a majority saying they did. Across the other 4 respondent groups, a majority was either in no for frontline staff, don't know for frontline staff, or when you combine no and don't know together, that's where you see a majority. Of those who collected data on their STEAM programming, i.e. of those who said yes to the slide we just saw, most reported seeing improvement in STEAM programming over time. So you can see a majority across all respondent groups said, yes, our data indicate that our STEAM programming has improved over time. And again, these are only for those who have collected the data on that last slide. When we asked the respondents who did collect data and said that they saw improvement in their STEAM programming over time, we asked them in an open-ended way, how did you see that improvement? What improved? The majority reported saying improvement in A, student attendance, such as higher attendance on STEAM days. And that's a quote from one of the responses, though anonymized from context for privacy. The second theme was student engagement and participation, such as students are more engaged and want to stay the full duration of the program, and kids are having more fun. Or the third theme was student interest, such as youth voice asking for more programming. Very few respondents commented on increased student learning as a way in which their programming had improved. Two of the few quotes we got on this were the work provided from the students, as in the STEAM programming work the students did was of a higher quality. And the second quote, students have demonstrated learning by presenting benchmark projects, which is an evidence of like the quality of how they are able to demonstrate their learning. So again, this is a summary of our survey on CQI and STEAM for this project. If you would like more information on the survey and more information about the results of the survey beyond the themes and summary presented here, you can go to cistemresearch.org, which is probably the website where you found this webinar. Again, I've been Jared Boyce at SRI Education, and on behalf of myself and the rest of the CI STEM team, thank you very much for watching this recording.